This time on Thought Monopoly, we will finish learning about the worldviews of our remaining scholars. Then we will hear their opinions on some popular boundary questions.
Things don't happen without a reason and without a cause, and that we can understand those causes, but not always. We're limited by our abilities and our tools and our brains. We can get better and improve our understanding of nature and harness it to our ends, hopefully good ends, but that's up to us whether they're good or bad ends. It's not proven at all. Any of these realm of speculations about what came before the Big Bang or caused it, or what these are, I'm always very clear when I teach at any level about where you can draw the line of the things you know and the things you really don't know, and you're just being very clever and hypothesizing, using theories and stretching them, and maybe you stretch them to a breaking point, but you won't know if you can't test them.
So can we exclude God from the conversation then when it comes to cosmology?
It's not part of the landscape of the theories that people work with.
Right.
You could call it an unnecessary hypothesis. I guess people have said that in this sense, because purely naturalistic explanations of the universe have taken us with verifiable predictions that can be tested back to less than a microsecond after the Big Bang and forward. And that's pretty good.
I mean, my view of the world is continuing to change and modify as I investigate reality. But there are some pillars that are sort of have come into place. I mentioned that I came into philosophy as someone who didn't know whether or not, for example, there is an ultimate source of reality in the form of a perfect being such as God. And so this was one of my inquiries, my first inquiries into both science and philosophy. And I've come to think that for me, as far as I can see rationally, that there are reasons to think that God exists and that the purpose of life, as I said before, is to love one another. The world was created for relationship. This is one of the highest goods. This is, in a sense, kind of the goal of the universe. And I think that there's evidence for this just even in the fine-tuning of the universe. The fact that the universe looks to be within very narrow parameters that are required to make evolution of life anywhere in the universe possible. Yeah. And there's scientific evidence for this, but I think also there's some just philosophical evidence for this. When you think about the kinds of realities, sometimes I wonder, why is there something rather than nothing? Especially at night. I'll be trying to go to sleep and I'll think, whoa, like I exist. And it's, call me a philosopher, but the fact that anything exists at all sometimes does startle me. But not just that there's something, but that there's the kind of reality that includes building blocks for organisms like us that can think about the origin of the universe and that can actually wonder about who we are and that can feel. I mentioned the hard problem, that we can have consciousness and that we can make ethical decisions. And it seems to me that this is best explained by some kind of theistic foundation, although I greatly respect thinkers who see things otherwise, and I consider myself as a colleague and a teammate with those who are a fan of reason and of science and of evidence, because I think if you follow the evidence where it leads, if you're a truth seeker, you'll find more and more truth. Sure. And so my worldview, I don't have. Sometimes I think people worry that religious people sort of come to science with an ideology. They come to philosophy with a worldview, and then they sort of interpret the evidence in light of their prior worldview. Well, for me, I came to science not knowing if God existed. And I was reading articles by both atheists and theists trying to understand the universe, and I just continue to keep that attitude. Just want to know what reality's like, so I test my beliefs. I test my belief about God. I have conversations with atheist friends and ask them, help me out. I come to listen.
Yeah, right.
There is this verse I like, which is to be quick to listen and slow to speak.
Yeah, right.
And I really think that as theists are quicker to listen, slower to speak, willing to be wrong, willing to honor those who think differently than them, willing to learn from them. I really think that will open up the bridge in the conversation. And I think that atheists will have a chance, I think, of taking more seriously some of the actual evidence, some of the reasons that undergird theistic belief, because it won't just feel like rationalization. I'm coming to this conversation already believing and just trying to bring every evidence. No, it's not like that. I want to know what's true.
Sure.
And so that's where I'm at. And so, yeah, my worldview, my big picture of reality, God's at the foundation, and the point of life, honestly, is to love one another.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why I love atheists.
Now we know how our scholars interpret reality in our universe. Let's see how they tackle some boundary questions. First, we will ask some college students to define life. How do you think our scholars' definitions will compare?
Life, if just existence, then that's one thing, but life would be something else. So if somebody's on a heart-lung machine, or maybe they're comatose, I would say that's existence, but life is having some sort of self-determination. You're conscious, you can make choices, and you can do things.
By shining some light on some chemicals that can actually replicate itself, would you consider that life?
Just by replicating itself?
Yeah.
Yes, I would say that's life. Oh yeah, see, but they wouldn't have a self-determined consciousness, but they're alive and they have some type of biological function going on.
Life? I don't know why, but a cell comes to mind.
The cell, okay.
Yeah, the basic unit of life is a cell, and that's just what comes to mind.
Okay.
There's different forms of life. There's like intelligent life, which are humans, and then there's other types of life, which are plants. Life is a huge, you can't really just limit it to intelligent life.
What is life? Well, what definition of life? I mean, biologically, or I would say that there's sort of an existential perception of living and life as opposed to, the biological mechanics that make it, work, I suppose.
They've made some artificial RNA that can actually replicate itself.
All right.
Would that meet your definition of life?
Not really, no. No.
Okay.
What is life? Anything that's living that needs, nutrients to live and dies. Anything that lives and dies is life, I think.
All right. Yeah.
I
Okay.
feel like I've talked about it at least once
Okay.
with different teachers or other people I know.
Okay.
Synthetic life? I don't know. That's a good question.
Life is, I can't say that it's when we're conscious, because there are people who have life. I'm guessing when all our cells, or at least most of them, are alive, working. I learned about cells from a teacher.
Okay.
And logic, I guess. Based on what I learned, I can infer certain things about cells.
Life is anything that has biological processes that cause it to be able to grow or change. What I've learned through my classes and things, because I'm actually majoring in biology, you probably use reason and authority, because authority is what gives you kind of the basic stuff, and then you have to reason out why things work a certain way or whether you want to believe it or not.
Someone say animals?
I do.
So we've got animals. Is there anything else that's alive?
I see a lot of misconceptions coming from the kids about things that come up in science. Recently we were talking about how to define something that's living, and that became really interesting because you would hear, well, everything that's living moves. So cars are alive. That came up in 3 classes. Cars are living because cars move and they eat gas. So, so cars are a living thing, and that came up quite a bit among all 3 kindergartens, and I thought that was amazing.
Humans are alive. Is there anything else in the whole world that's alive?
Earth. The Earth.
Ooh, the Earth is alive. Well, how do you think that the Earth is alive?
Because it's turning.
Ooh, the Earth turns, so it's alive? Because living things move? Okay.
Trees are alive.
What?
Trees.
What do you mean trees are alive?
They grow.
Oh, that's another thing about living things. Living things grow. You're right.
So they come with their sensory perceptions, like you're talking about. And then that also kind of engages them in their own explorations into living things. And that's when we bring in the defining characteristics of, okay, well, living things eat and drink, living things move in different ways, but what does that really look like? And what else does it take to label something as living or non-living?
Scientists cannot agree on a definition of life.
How would you define life?
It is a very humbling and a very difficult question. Let me give you an attempt of my definition. It's a form of existence of matter that is self-organized. Matter can exist in this functional form. It can exist, the same matter can exist in a non-functional form. I don't know the cause of it, and I don't know how I would draw the boundaries. We are comfortable of defining life within a little range, within a tubular view that we can see. But I think that there's more to it. I think the critical element is that the laws of energy, physics, and chemistry are exactly the same in life versus in non-life. An atom is an atom, whether it is in my brain or it is in a rock. At some point, there is an organization. There's an organization that supports a particular function. This is where my definition would be. But it's probably one of the most difficult questions, and I cannot answer it fully.
That's been a challenge for all of us scientists, is to come up with a satisfactory definition of life. It's referred to as the scientific undefinable. But we know that all life forms, for example, process energy through metabolism to do work. So we wouldn't call something alive if it's not able to do that. That it can reproduce, and that it can manage information. So it can create information, store information, and transmit information. But life is more than that. And I got an article published in Astrobiology where it was devoted to trying to come up with a definition for life. Bottom line was, we can't come up with a complete, satisfactory definition. It's a testimony just how complex life really is, that we're challenged even to define it. But we know that all life forms share certain features in common.
Right.
I would say that a living organism is a complex and organized array of systems of biochemicals.
It's very difficult to define a system of chemical entities that are able to reproduce themselves and therefore evolve, they change over time.
Life at its simplest level, we understand at a cellular level, and that what we understand at a cellular level is also true at an organismic level. You need to be able to take in nutrients, use those nutrients through metabolic processes. You also need an energy source and the ability to implement that energy to carry out all of the functions that are necessary for growth and reproduction.
That's the exact definition NASA gave us.
Seriously? Well, there you go. All right, I'm happy to hear that. As we think about life, we don't always typically think of bacterial life as the same way we think about plant life. We don't always think about plant life the same way that we think about animal life. So there seems to be qualitative distinctions, even though all of those met that sort of characterization of life definition that I just gave you. And as a Christian, I would say that there's even another qualitative level of thinking about life. Jesus refers to himself as the way, the truth, and the life. And there are many scriptures that say in him, in God, or in Jesus, we live and move and have our being. And those who have the Son have life. Now, I obviously don't think that that means that people who don't follow Christ or who don't know Christ aren't alive. But I think there's a qualitative difference in the sense that if we know God, if we know Jesus, then we understand life at a deeper and fuller and different level.
NASA defines life as a self-sustained chemical system capable of undergoing Darwinian evolution.
That's an adequate definition of biological life. I think people have a bigger idea of what life is than simple chemistry. And so I think that it's very hard for people to embrace a definition like that so narrowly, unless they're a scientist and thinking of it in that constrained way, which is perfectly fine to do. But I would say life is a bit bigger deal than the physical realm. And so I would say there are some things in the experience of life, quote unquote, that are beyond the full capacities of natural science.
Great question, and unfortunately, this is something that philosophers have not reached a consensus on, working out this definition. And I don't myself really have a theory of the nature of life. I can tell you things like I suspect that the purpose of life, the meaning of life, kind of the goal of life is ultimately, I think, relationship, fellowship with people. People sometimes say that the meaning of life is one of those philosophical questions that just could not be answered in principle. Whereas I think actually the answer sort of stares us in the face all the time. It really is connection with people.
Yeah.
But as far as how to define life, as a philosopher, I like to give definitions for all my terms. But this is one term that I might have to treat as a primitive because I don't know how to unpack that in a successful. It's one of the open inquiries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, our scholars' attempts at defining life are very similar. But what do they believe about the origin of life on planet Earth?
Today, scientists still don't know how or where life on Earth began.
The blood-brain barrier is just a reinvention of the cell wall, a huge invention of nature, a huge part of the definition of life. Is this idea of creating a limit of the body and regulating the transfer of molecules of matter and energy across that barrier. So this was just like everything else in nature. Nature comes up with an invention and then uses that invention in various variants and various sort of iterations of it to serve a very particular purpose of protecting the nervous system. But the idea that you have a membrane and that membrane is impermeable, but through that membrane you create holes, and those holes are specified for transporting things and moving things in and out, that already has been invented millions and millions of years before the blood-brain barrier emerged. So the amygdala is one of the most connected structures of the primate brain. What is remarkable about the amygdala, it's an incredible connectivity. And this high connectivity comes from this idea of its origin, of where do the cells that comprise the amygdala come from. Now, where consciousness arises from, we don't know.
Oh.
This is a very difficult question This is actually, it's called the C word in neuroscience.
Oh, really?
Yes. Very, very few people are courageous enough to tackle it. Of course, we're always thinking about it. It's because it is ultimately one of the most important questions. I personally don't know enough, but I know that the amygdala is not incredibly essential.
Okay.
I think people can lose their amygdalas on both sides. They can still be conscious and they can be aware. The emotional content of their awareness will be affected, but awareness will be there.
When we talk about Darwinian evolution, are Darwinian principles relatable to what we know about the universe and the astronomy point of view from that perspective?
Well, there's been a new discipline launched about 15, 20 years ago called astrobiology. And it's based out of the recognition that yes, the evolutionary paradigm does overlap into other disciplines of science. And if we're going to solve the origin and the history of life, we need to do it from a multidisciplinary perspective. So, for example, I and my colleagues have been attending Origin of Life research conferences, and what I've noticed in the last few years is it's become interdisciplinary. For example, it was a physicist who pointed out why we don't see prebiotics on the early Earth. And came up with what was called the oxygen ultraviolet paradox. If you've got oxygen in early Earth's environment, that stops the prebiotic chemistry. But if you don't have oxygen, ultraviolet radiation will come in from the sun unimpeded, and that too stops the prebiotic chemistry. But it was a Romanian physicist who said, it's not enough that we have a physical answer for why the early Earth had none of the building blocks for the origin of life. I want to know why. And so he actually did some experiments showing that the early Earth had such a huge quantity of uranium and thorium, the radioactive decay of those isotopes would be enough to split the water in the oceans, at least some of it, into hydrogen and oxygen, and therefore oxygen is the answer as to why. Matter of fact, you'd have both oxygen and ultraviolet radiation being a stop to origin of life chemistry.
Wow.
Which means we have to come up with a non-naturalistic explanation for the origin of life.
Yeah. I know that you and Lawrence Krauss and most of the astronomers, astrophysicists have agreed that our universe is extremely fine-tuned. You know, with all the science fiction movies and everything out there, we see these aliens, that have these characteristics, and people probably are thinking, well, if there's hundreds of billions of galaxies out there, surely there must be life somewhere else in the universe. Could you speak for a minute about fine-tuning and how that relates to those kinds of mindsets?
Well, astronomers would argue that based on fine-tuning arguments, we may be able to find planets somewhere in our universe other than our own where bacteria could survive. It still doesn't answer the question of where the bacteria come from. The origin of life currently has no naturalistic explanation, and we here at Reasons to Believe would say, well, at least here on Earth, we can show that it didn't come from a naturalistic source. And so that becomes a barrier. I mean, if the probability of a naturalistic origin of life is zero, then the probability of life elsewhere is zero. But I am reasonably confident that we may be able to find planets where bacteria could conceivably survive. What we notice here about Earth, we not only have a planet where bacteria can survive, they can survive for 3.8 billion years. Now that gives you a whole new fine-tuning challenge. Can we find a body outside of the Earth where bacteria could actually last for billions of years? Fine-tuning that's needed for that is orders of magnitude by a tremendous degree than just having a place where bacteria can survive for a few months. But of course, on our planet, we have animals, we have plants, we have human beings. And there's a growing consensus, even amongst my peers who are not believers, that we're not going to find another body where advanced life could conceivably exist. And then we're now finding planets outside of our solar system. Mm-hmm. Over 1,900 have been discovered and measured.
Those are exoplanets, right?
Exoplanets, right? And we were first discovering them in the 1990s. The presumption was we're going to find lots of planets that are twins of the planets in our solar system. Maybe not twins of the Earth, but at least twins of the other solar system bodies. So far, we've found none that are twins. They're all very different than the planets in our solar system. We are finding them of the right size. So, for example, we now have found planets as small as Mars outside of our solar system. And we find planets that are the same size as Jupiter, even the same distance, relatively the same distance from the star as Jupiter is. However, one of the defining features of Jupiter that makes advanced life possible here on planet Earth, it's the most massive planet in our planetary system. The Jupiter twins we're finding are not in that category. There's much bigger planets in the system than that, or they have very elliptical orbits. And what we realize is Jupiter's been fine-tuned in terms of its mass and its orbit to make advanced life possible on Earth. Change the orbit ever so slightly, and that possibility goes away. We now, thanks to the research on these exoplanets, we know that every one of the 8 planets in our solar system plays a crucial role in making advanced life possible here on Earth.
Wow.
So when our family celebrates Thanksgiving, we thank God for Venus and Mercury and Mars and Neptune and all the rest, because we need all those to enjoy our Thanksgiving dinner.
Wow.
So the fine-tuning argument has gotten much more impressive,
Yeah.
and it's really testable. If the fine-tuning is the result of the handiwork of an intelligent, mindful, powerful creator, we would expect that the more we research the universe and our galaxy and our planetary system, the fine-tuning evidence would go up and not go down. Whereas someone from, say, a non-theistic perspective would be predicting it would stabilize or go down. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is the fine-tuning evidence not only has gone up, it's gone up dramatically so.
Wow.
So, for example, in our reasons.org website, we give you the data that shows that over a 20-year period, the evidence has gotten approximately a factor of 1 million times more impressive per month.
Per month.
That's how rapidly the fine-tuning evidence is growing, which I think allows us to make some philosophical deductions based on the fine-tuning. But it's a wonderful example of how our different worldviews can be put to the test.
As we have seen, an individual's worldview dramatically shapes their answers to boundary questions. Now you may be wondering how accurately their beliefs correspond to reality. I'm John Jones. Join us next time as we continue exploring topics beyond the scope of science.
To request your study guide, email us at thoughtmonopoly@gmail.com.